Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. So today I'm going to talk about Wakanda Forever and how it's supposed to be a crown jewel for Marvel and how it is meant to take a full pivot in towards your quote-unquote progressive, woke kinds of entertainment. Now, people might be saying they've already done that with Phase 4, but I think with things like She-Hulk and Miss Marvel and Captain Marvel, they were just testing the waters. With this movie, they are fully pivoting directly towards woke entertainment, quite specifically taking the all-new, all-different Marvel and making it the only thing that you're going to see. And what I want to do is, as I usually do with these kinds of things, is to take a 50,000 feet above look down at what's going on with this supposedly cultural moment, which is what Marvel is trying to push this as, by looking at the movie and some of the pivotal points within the movie itself. Now, when I do talk about the movie, it's going to be full spoilers. However, before I get there, there's just a couple of things that I want to mention. Number one, I'm going to try something different with my channel. I'm going to try 1-hour interviews with people. I did an interview like that with Clifton Duncan on his podcast, which I'll link that in the description. And really, I think that's what my channel needs in order to give it a shot in the arm, just because things have slowed down significantly, just because YouTube is a strange beast to use. I'm hoping to make these videos that will come out during the week and not interfere with these weekend videos. I'll probably do a test, but the first real large-scale interview that I'm going to do is with Sargon, Carl Benjamin. I also got the okay from Clifton to do another interview with him, and I have a few other people lined up as well. However, I'm telling you this because I would like you to put in the comments who you would like me to interview. I'm going to be concentrating on the theme of storytelling. That's what these discussions will be centered around. And the only caveat really that I have is I'm doing this to try to grow my channel. So I would like people who have, at the very least, comparable numbers of subscribers to mine, which means I'm about 20,000 subscribers right now. And I need someone with that many subscribers to draw in enough of an audience so that I actually grow my channel. That being said, however, just to let you know, people with over 1 million subscribers are not going to give me the time of day. I've had people in the comments suggest, why don't you go and talk to Tim Pool or Shadversity or The Critical Drinker? Yeah, see, those people are much too busy to deal with someone who has 20,000 subscribers, and I don't blame them. The other thing that I want to note is that my new graphic novel, The Valiant Heroes, is up on Indiegogo right now. The link for it is in the description. And if I remember, it also is in the pinned comment. What you're looking at in the background is some of the beautiful art from that graphic novel. You can get that plus my first graphic novel, which is Thomas Valiant, on that Indiegogo page. And again, just to let you know, I will be posting about my campaign regularly over the next little while, just because there are some questionable things going on at Indiegogo, whether or not people can see your campaigns or not. There's questions about that, but I would say it's still the best place to go to. So that being said, if you want to share the link to my graphic novel, that would be extremely helpful. And if any of this art looks appealing to you at all, you might want to go over and see if my graphic novel is for you. It is an 82-page spectacular graphic novel of good old superhero suspense, epic storytelling, and fun, and will look and feel like something you would pick up off the spinner rack in, say, 1982. But back to the topic at hand, which is how Wakanda Forever is going to be a turning point where in the MCU, which has been a successful cultural phenomenon for more than a decade, how they're going to take that and pivot the entire thing towards a central point of quote-unquote progressive woke entertainment. And again, you might be saying, that's already there. I would say no, that's a feature which is there on top of the storytelling that they still do. But from this point out, the storytelling is going to be the message that is inserted within these movies, shows, etc. There is a significant difference between those two. And if you know anything about comics, it would be the difference between normal comics from, let's say, the 80s and the 90s, and the all-new, all-different Marvel, which came into being, and I'll talk about in a few minutes, having a central theme of progressivism. And just to let you know up front, I'm going to spend the first half of this video talking about how those progressive themes came through Marvel Comics and are meant to go directly into the movies. That's what I'm going to do before I even get to Wakanda Forever and their implementation of that. So, very briefly, what you see within Wakanda Forever is the playing out of what has been going on within Marvel Comics over the last, say, 10 to 12 years. And what we saw there was an implementation of quote-unquote progressive feminist ideology upon the stories so that it was the controlling force behind the stories, how the reality within Marvel Comics actually worked, and what that meant for the characters. Now, how can I make such a broad statement? Well, my evidence for all of that is littered throughout my videos, as I have gone over time and time again podcasts specifically from Marvel, wherein you had the person in operational control of the company, Sana Amanat, who was also the vice president of content and character development, discussing week after week, year after year, on her own personal vanity project podcast, which was put out by Marvel, discussing the insertion of progressive feminist ideology into storytelling. And the point being that she wasn't working off of no script and just winging it. She's the sister of Omar Amanat, a man who was once called the most influential man in Hollywood that you've never heard of, who quite specifically, when he was flying high, wrote a treatise on how to insert progressive ideology into entertainment and then use that entertainment to get bigger and bigger venues in order to promote this message. She was using that playbook to specifically turn Marvel Comics in this direction. She was quite specifically tasked to do so, again, by her own admission, by her own words of when she was asked to take the job. I'll link the most relevant video for all of this in the description if you want to go back and listen to the how and why all of this occurred to get all of the receipts for what I am saying. But the point being that one of the things that she concentrated on week after week when she talked very freely on that podcast was the implementation of a very basic feminist idea. And that feminist idea, again, which she references over and over again, is that there are two kinds of power. Because, of course, for progressivism, everything boils down to power. The core of the entire ideology is might makes right. But within this feminist ideology, again, which she referenced over and over again, and which I looked up and which I confirmed, they separate power into two different kinds. One, which is a male kind, which is evil, and one which is a female kind, which is saintly. And they go so far as to use specific words for each of these. If you use in feminist ideology the word power, you're talking about male power, and that has the earmarks of being competitive, conflict-driven, and destructive, while at the same time concentrating on things as objects, that is to say, objectively, with logic and reason, because yes, they see logic and reason as being a destructive force. And in the feminist ideological terms, when you wish to discuss female power, you use the word empowerment, because empowerment says that that power is actually creative, cooperative, community building, and centers itself around subjects. That is to say, thinking in a subjective way, wherein you use your feelings to quote-unquote understand things. And the point being why we need to discuss this when talking about storytelling that is being done by a quote-unquote progressive person, especially if you're talking about a story that involves a hero, it's because, well, first of all, they believe there's nothing at all that is different between men and women. Sure, men concentrate on all of those toxic things, but why do they do that? They do that because of societal pressures, society shaping them in this way. They don't have to act that way. According to their ideology, anyways. In their mind, men are not programmed by nature to act in a manly way. No, they're programmed by nurture to act in this specific way, which is toxic. And how you get them out of that is to societally change them into what is good. And, of course, the shorthand for what is good is the feminine. That is to say, you need to change men into women because the female is the default for what is good. This is one of the key ideological points that many people don't really get about current progressive feminism. It's that the female is quite specifically the default for how you describe what is good. So the point being that if you have a story with a hero and your hero is supposed to be a representation of good, what kind of person are they going to be? Well, they're going to be female. And not only going to be female, but if they're male, they're going to act in a female way. And that intersects with storytelling also in a very unique way. Because most of us who live in reality know that what I have just said is a bunch of hogwash. We have scientific evidence that men and women are different from the very time that they are little children, before they are born. We know that there is good within men and women. You can't claim that all men are evil and all women are saintly, etc., etc. But if you have people who are writing a story who believe this central point of progressive feminist ideology, that women are saintly and the default for good is women and everything evil comes from the masculine, and as I said, you're writing a story especially about heroes where they have to embody what is good, you have to construct a reality in the background that is going to ensure that that ideological talking point is affirmed. And that is what you saw within Marvel Comics over the last 10 years. And this is exactly what we now see within Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. So let's take all of that and see how a real-world example of the implementation works. Spoiler number 1. Even though this movie is called Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, Black Panther is not in this movie. At the very least, T'Challa, who was the Black Panther for what, I think 60 years now, more in the comics, is not in this movie. Now, they made a decision not to recast the role of Black Panther, and I'll get into that in a few minutes, but the point being that even though they didn't want to recast it, that doesn't mean that Black Panther had to be cut completely out of this movie. With how much CGI that Marvel movies use, they could very easily have put in a death scene for this character at the first of the movie. Many people are pointing this out because what happens in this movie is that T'Challa, Black Panther, dies at the first of the movie, but it is never seen. Nothing is shown for the audience. It is just, this is happening, that is happening, people talking to each other, describing what is going on. The character, supposedly, according to the description, has a unknown virus of unknown origin, and then that brings him into a state wherein he dies, which is very close to the death of the actor Chadwick Boseman. Now, this has in itself importance, but there is something else very important that I want to focus on right now. It's the fact that, okay, you wanted this character to die, no problem. You didn't want to recast it, therefore the character dies, along with the actor. That doesn't mean he can't be in the film. Again, with all of the CGI technology, you could have given, at the very least, one scene wherein this character dies. You could have had stock footage, I'm sure, of Chadwick Boseman putting on the mask, and then have an entire opening scene where T'Challa dies in a heroic way, all done through CGI. And many people are asking, why didn't Marvel do this? This would be a spectacular scene to begin the movie with. It would be a spectacular draw for this movie. People would feel like the character went out on a high note, and it would be a much better movie. Not to mention the fact that in doing it the way that they did, they broke one of the cardinal rules of writing, which is show, don't tell. No, this entire thing is tell, don't show. And by the way, I do not ascribe to what many people think of is the fact that the people who write these things just don't know what they're doing and they're stupid. No, I'm sorry. That's just a hubristic way of individuals saying, I can't understand what they're doing here, and since I can't understand it, it either doesn't exist or doesn't make any sense at all, which makes them stupid. No, just because many of us don't understand what they're doing doesn't mean they're stupid people. They have a very specific reason for creating stories in this way. And the point of why they had to kill this character off screen instead of giving him a heroic death scene, even if it just took a couple of minutes at the first of the movie, which could have been done during the opening rolling of the credits, was because that would change the entire message of the movie. That is to say, if he died in a heroic way, especially in a battle, what is a battle? Well, a battle is confrontational. And so he would have died in a way wherein the source of everything is confrontation, which is male power, which is evil. And they don't want that to be the driving force of the entire movie. Instead, they substitute for that an off-screen death, and the reason why is because the death is no longer the driving force of this movie. It is the emotional reaction of these other characters to that death, which then becomes the driving force, the engine for the entire movie to take place. And again, I'm talking about all this because I'm referencing back to those podcasts that I listen to so much, where they talk about how to construct a story on these Marvel podcasts, where it's all about the driving engine of motivation, where Sana Amanat herself was talking to an older comic writer, and the older comic writer said, the thing is about these comics is it all comes down to a fight. And then Sana Amanat said, no, that's not the way we make comics anymore. It's not about the conflict. It's not about the confrontation. Sure, that might be off to the side, but what we focus on now is the emotional, is if you can be a good friend, if you can be empathetic. This is why she gave a completely separate interview with another Disney vice president who was the VP of animation, talking about one of their projects, which was taking comic book characters and putting them into internet shorts in Marvel Rising, which they concentrated their entire test audience on only girls and hired animation companies based on how well they could put emotions on the faces of the characters. And when I originally heard that, I said to myself, okay, they're concentrating on girls. But no, they weren't. Because when the show went to air, what did Sana Amanat do? She got on her podcast and said, hey, you parents out there, you need to sit your little boys down in front of this show and show them that it is for them and to teach them that they need to like girl things. Once again, coming back to that idea that you see, it isn't that they're concentrating on women, it's that they need to turn all males, whether they be boys or men, into females. Why? Because that's the only acceptable way to exist in their mindset. And again, that's why I'm saying the emotional reaction to the death, which happens off screen, you see, that is a female kind of power. And the entire movie is an exploration of those emotions and thus an exploration of the feminine. And they do this in a spectacularly underhanded way. Why? Because, as I said, by making the character die in a way that was similar to the death of Chadwick Boseman, what they were doing was taking the actors and prompting them to think in a way wherein they delivered their lines not about the character, but about Chadwick Boseman. Therefore, when you feel the emotions of those characters within this movie talking about the death of the character, they're actually drawing upon real emotions of grief that they have had for this man who they have worked with. And they're taking that emotional oomph that they are giving from their actors, selling that to the audience, and that's how they were using the emotional as the bedrock for the entire movie. And so, if you look at it through that lens, which they specifically do, then everything else in the movie makes sense. Why in the world, everyone is asking, do you have these spectacular male characters who start a battle scene, you get pumped for them to do something heroic and cool, and all of a sudden, they're just gone? Why? Because again, that's confrontation. That's the male. That's the evil part that they need to just put that in there to drag you along, again, as Sana Amanat talked about when creating comics, just enough to trail you along as a carrot on a stick to say, maybe you might get some of this later. You never will, but it's enough to trail you along. But again, the deliberate lack of concentration on the male characters, which, by the way, many people who don't have a dog in this fight, who are honestly reviewing this movie, are commenting on, saying it makes no sense. Saying things like, if you had extended the scene just a little more to allow it to play out with these male characters, you would have given this movie much more of a presence. It would have made it much, much more enjoyable. Why in the world would they specifically choose not to do so? Again, this is something that has been happening within comics for at least 10 years now. People are saying to themselves, well, why in the world, when you're writing a comic, do you cut away when you're about to have an action scene and just have everything talking? A lot of people say to themselves, well, you see, they're just screenwriters or trying to be screenwriters or making these things for the screen. Therefore, they're making it in a way where they don't have to spend a lot of money on a battle scene when they actually put it down on film. I would say, no, that's not what they're doing. I suppose that might be a small consideration, but the entire point is not to show the confrontation, because the confrontation is not the central point. And they don't want the confrontation to be the central point because that's male, that's destructive, that's the evil part. You want to teach the people, and specifically do that, teach the people, your progressive ideology, your feminist ideology of women are the saints. Women are the default good people. Therefore, you concentrate on the emotion. Therefore, you concentrate on how people react, speaking about how they feel about the confrontation that you never get to see. Some smaller things that everyone is bringing up about this movie, saying, why in the world would they take a bunch of side characters and then try to revolve a story around side characters? It doesn't work. Well, you see, all of those side characters are female. And the point being, once again, is to concentrate not upon what is actually happening, what the action is within the movie. Action is objective. They want to concentrate on the subjective. And what is the subjective? It is the underlying cooperation and building of a community with these women through their emotions and their emotional reaction to what has happened within the death of T'Challa in order to explore those feelings in order to promote the feminine. Because, once again, that's the default of the good person. Another question is, why do you get all of these scenes or parts of scenes, like, say, the one where Riri Williams is flying up with her eyes closed, shaking her head, screaming? Why? This is all about self-affirmation. Once again, concentrating on the subjective and the emotional. And what is the central point of where this emotional trail is going to bring you? Well, it's going to bring you to the end of the movie where T'Challa's sister, Shuri, becomes Black Panther. This is a story quite specifically about Shuri becoming Black Panther. And how does she become Black Panther? It is through an emotional journey. An emotional journey that concentrates on female characters, their grief, their reactions to grief, their community building around those reactions to that grief. And so instead of having a traditional way of setting up a hero, the old Marvel way of doing so, where there is a spectacular adventure that leads into a confrontation and a heroic battle, that must all be gotten rid of because it's all dependent upon the male. And it must be substituted for, once again, emotional exploration and all of the feminine. So, long story short, what you're seeing within this Black Panther film, wherein you're sitting in your seat going, this makes no sense why the writers would choose this path to go to when they had several others that would be much better. What you're seeing in that story is the exact same thing that I've been describing within Marvel Comics for the last number of years now. It is a deliberate movement towards inserting a progressive ideological talking point, not only as the central figure for the entire story, but the driving force behind every motivation that makes any quote-unquote sense. That is to say, that drives the story along within the movie itself. Or to put it another way, as I usually describe when talking about comics, it's that the universe itself within which the characters exist becomes a progressive talking point that warps and bends and twists around the character in order to affirm them as being the quote-unquote heroes. And that's what you're going to get moving forward within Marvel movies and within Marvel shows. The next phase of all of this is not, I'm going to have a movie with more and more progressive talking points in it. It's not that we're going to make a movie which is based in this universe, the Marvel universe, and overlay onto it all of these progressive talking points. It's that the Marvel universe itself, which is the underlying reality of all of the stories, is going to be replaced with a universe wherein progressivism is completely true. That is to say, is the default of how the universe exists. Now, let's get into the other point of why I think this is a pivotal shift for the MCU. Quite specifically, it's because of Disney's choice not to recast the role of T'Challa, Black Panther. They have, in effect, doubled down on something which has plagued them over the last number of years, which is to say, they can't recast any of the characters with new actors. People have identified Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr. so much that you can't recast that role. And it's the same with Thor or Captain America or any of the other MCU characters. Now, they were trying to get themselves, it seemed, out from underneath that, and then they went and shot themselves in the foot by deciding not to recast the role of T'Challa as Black Panther. Now, they did this for a very specific reason. They did this because, of course, they want to make Shuri the new Black Panther. They're taking what they previously saw as a fault in what they were doing and leaning into it as a strength, which is to say, all of these older characters, yeah, they have to be retired. Why? Because we can't use those actors anymore, and people identify with those actors. And we, as a company, will double down and say, yes, you are absolutely correct in doing so by not recasting this role. And they're doing that quite specifically so all of those male characters can be replaced by female characters. And this gives them an excuse of how they can't go back. Within the Marvel Comics, they did this exact thing. People kicked up such a stink that eventually they had to go back to the old male characters. But within these movies, within what they're doing with the MCU, they are burning that bridge so that there is no way to go back. They're trying to force, once again, the audience to accept this replacement of the male characters with the female characters. Once again, why? Because they're moving into this new phase where if you have a hero, they must be female. They must be female because only the feminine is good. And so, even if they're reworking of the entire universe in order for it to affirm all of these progressive feminist ideological talking points is rejected by the people who want to see these movies, there's no turning back. And no one burns a bridge that large unless they are determined to go full speed ahead. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. And don't forget, my graphic novel, The Valiant Heroes, is now up on Indiegogo. It is everything that Wakanda Forever is not. It is a good old superhero story with suspense, epic storytelling, and fun. And if that sounds appealing to you at all, you might want to click on the link in the description or in the pinned comment and go on over and see if my graphic novel is for you. All right, I'll leave it there. I'll see you later. Bye.